Ready, Pooja? Welcome to the Chicago Cultural Alliance Meeting the Moment series. My name is Marisol Kelly, Interim Director of Programs, and I am joined today by Pooja Das, CCA's Operations Manager. Our session today will be presented by John Bateman, founder of nonprofit Sanity LLC, and the topic is crafting a common narrative. A common narrative of your non-for-profit and its programs helps provide consistent language for more than grant applications, from donor appeals to your website and more. But before we begin the session, I want to take a moment to highlight the Meeting the Moment series itself, which is a professional development series designed to support cultural and heritage nonprofits during a time of rapid change and uncertainty. Through these sessions, led by experienced leaders, the program provides practical guidance across key functions, including marketing, communications, fundraising, finance, operations, and collections. Meeting the Moment helps organizations build the tools, knowledge, and confidence to adapt, enhance their operations, and better serve their communities. The Meeting the Moment series is made possible by the Chicago Community Trust and the MacArthur Foundation. Now, a couple of housekeeping. During the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen to share any questions that you may have. We will reserve time at the end to answer as many submitted questions as possible. And if you'd like to ask a question or join the conversation, please feel free to use the raise hands feature at the bottom of your screen and come off of mute. We invite everybody to stay until the end for a brief survey because this helps us continue improving the series. Now, this session is being recorded and will be archived in our website under Meeting the Moment series. Now, I will stop sharing so we can all welcome John Bateman.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am John Bateman, and I'm going to speak for a little bit today to share with you my experience in how to use a common narrative. I've been in your shoes, I've been an executive director of a regional arts agency, and I've worked with nonprofits of different types for about 20 years now. What is a common narrative? We'll talk about that, why it matters, how to use it, and then what I call the ingredients for a common narrative. There is a template that will be included as a handout. It's a template that I've built over a couple of years and use with my clients. You're free to use it, adapt it to your needs. That'll be provided when the session recording gets posted. So think of a common narrative. It's really like a narrative bio of your organization, the story that your organization has to tell, the work you do, and a place to hold all the other information that's frequently requested in grant applications, as well as other things when you're doing your annual filings with the Secretary of State and any other updates you might need to do. The goal with a common narrative, this is often, I hear others refer to boilerplate language. I don't like that term. I'll explain a little bit more why later. Uh, A common narrative is a way to help keep your organization's story consistent wherever you need to use it. So not just in grant applications. Another goal is it can help save time in writing and the submitting process of applications because you already have language drafted. It can help you with other things like donor appeals, updating a website, uh, sponsorship kits, anywhere you need to tell your story. It's a great place to keep favorite language and frequently requested information. Another goal with a common narrative is to help you delegate tasks when you have to submit multiple grants and reports at the same time. In a lot of particularly smaller organizations, the grant writing task ends up falling often on one person, usually the executive director. But a common narrative can help you identify different ways to delegate some of that task to others to help you get everything done. Why this matters? Why do we put the work into drafting something like this? Quite simply, it's to share your story consistently and efficiently. Consistently means anywhere you need to tell your organization's story. Share it with your board. It can help your board speak the same language as you, and it can also avoid uh, when you have new board members from defaulting to just telling folks to call the ED. Help engage your board in telling the story. It can save time. Funders require a wide range of information. This gives you one spot where it's easy to find what you need. I'm sure a lot of you have had that experience of you drafted a paragraph describing a specific program or an exhibit or something in your archives, and you can't remember where you wrote it. So you start trying to remember which grant application where you submitted it. And that can end up costing a lot of time, whereas using a document like this can give you one place to keep it. How do you use it? So think of it as a roadmap and a work in progress. So it keeps important information together, commonly requested information together. Use it to help delegate work to others. But also, I've found it very useful when I'm looking at all of the programs at an organization at one time to make sure that when I'm planning the grants that I'm going to submit coming up, that I haven't inadvertently omitted something that could uh, potentially be a project grant or get funding. And it's a good way to make sure, okay, we've got at least one or two grant applications covering everything we do. It's a roadmap, so it's not rigid. It's a design to it's to get you where you want to go when submitting grant applications. And it's a work in progress. It's not boilerplate. It's not copy and paste. It will evolve along with you. So when I say don't copy and paste, use what you need out of this common narrative that you draft to finalize an application based upon each funder's guidelines. You always need to read each funder's guidelines to make sure that you're tailoring and answering the questions that they ask. It's not to change your story, but it's to make sure that you're highlighting the questions and the points that that specific funder wants to know. I need to throw this out here. If you don't understand a question that a funder is asking, don't hesitate to contact the funder. That gives them feedback too. I see grant applications all the time where a question is unclear about whether it's asking about staff or contractors, and it's a good way to make sure you're answering the question, but also the funder needs to know if their questions are unclear. And don't forget, if your specific funders that you're approaching start asking you new questions, then add to this, adapt this to your needs for the audience that you're submitting grants to. So I'll go over some high-level ingredients for a common narrative. You can organize this really any way that works for you. I like to keep what I call key organization details together. So this is the tax ID number, the unique entity identifier number if you're applying for federal grants, congressional district, the Illinois State Arts Commission, Illinois Arts Council asks for this in the grant application. Good place to keep all your websites listed, a list of leadership and staff. This is also where you have various narratives. By narratives, there are several different spots where this can come up, but your mission, an overview of your organization, your program descriptions. So think of the key organization details as sort of the nuts and bolts of the organization. The narratives is where you start telling your story. You may have a financial narrative as well, and there may be secondary narratives, which I'll talk about those in a second. But this is where you start telling your story. Uh, in a common narrative, I always have a financial section where I keep an estimated average budget. Uh, a budget is or for the organization is done each year or should be done each year, it's helpful to have sort of an average of what that budget is, an estimated budget at any given time, links to fi tax returns, um, anything else that's related to finances that your funders are asking for. This is also a good spot to keep impact and feedback quotes, whether it's formal or informal feedback, quotes from artists, audience members, community partners, uh, whoever you work with, any sort of feedback that they give you, this is a great place to keep those quotes. If you do formal surveys, this is also a great place to keep that information. And links to key documents. As I mentioned previously, tax returns, but also um, work samples. A lot of funders give you the option to include work samples, and this is a great place to link where you keep work samples and a list of different types of media coverage and press coverage that you've gotten. I'll go into some of the details when I go through this. Remember, this is a template. So this is a draft of what you will have access to after the session. And I'm going to zoom in. Bear with me just a second. My allergies are going nuts today. Adapt this to your needs. This is how I have it organized. You can see what the overview. I give my clients a copy of this so they understand how to use this. Um, org backgrounds. Oftentimes, there is two different things that come up with funders. They'll ask you for an overview of your organization. Some funders will ask you for an org history. I like to draft those a little bit separately because you don't always need to go into the history of your organization, but you need to have it accessible for funders that want to know that information. With programs, you want to have a high-level overview of your programs. The overview is a great spot to include any narrative around your mission as to how you implement your mission. So with a mission statement, it really is just your board approved mission. But in a program overview, you can talk about how you enact and implement your mission with your programs. And then each individual program needs to have its own description. A financial narrative comes up from time to time, and usually where I see this is if something unusual happened during a year. I've had clients that switched the and they made a change in the end of their fiscal year. And so they had a short fiscal year and then back to a long fiscal year, and including a note to explain why the numbers look very strange for and reminding whoever's reading the application that that was a short year. I've seen organizations switch from cash to accrual accounting and working with the accountant to explain the impact that that has on the tax return is helpful to provide to funders and to advocate for yourself. I do find sometimes that this is a good spot if you want to include a couple of notes on your overall fundraising plan. This gives you a place to keep that. You want to write and have a spot where you talk about the need addressed. What is the need or the problem that your work solves? And that's not programs, but that's in your board, that's in your staff, your partners, your volunteers. How do you engage with them as part of your organization? You describe the population served. This gives you a spot for that. Now, a lot of these narrative sections that you see in this template, you could draft for individual programs. I don't have that in here. If you need that, feel free to add it. At some point, this has to be an efficient document, and if it gets too cumbersome, then I find that it's not likely to be used. I want to talk a little bit about measurements. Um, Impact is, you know, what your organization does and the impact it has. What is the results of your work? Measurements is how you measure that. A lot of us, particularly smaller organizations, don't have the bandwidth to do formal surveys. Don't forget the power of informal feedback. Uh, is it someone who attended your program? Is it a partner? Is it an artist? Or is it a speaker? Is it someone who walked through your exhibit? All of those can be used as measurements, even though they can be quite informal. It's something that helps you reflect upon and how you measure the impact of the work you do. I will talk a little bit about work samples. I'll come back to that. I do want to touch base on that. I'm not going to cover everything in this template. I do want to touch base on organization needs and strategy. Um, what do you need? And get beyond the money. So we all need larger grants. We all need multi-year funding because of the benefits that provides to our stress levels. But get specific here. And this might not be something that you share with a funder if they're not asking for it. It may be for your own benefit. Understand exactly what you need. The specificity might help you when you do your grant strategy to identify funders. So, for example, if you realize we need new computers, TechSoup is a nonprofit that gives in-kind grants, either discounts or free computer hardware and software. Your specific needs can help you identify where to look for opportunities. Strategy. I've worked with organizations who have formal strategic plans. I have organizations who have informal strategic plans that are a single page. A lot of that depends upon the resources they have to implement that. What is your strategy? Whether it's something formal or informal, what is your strategy for your approach to the work? Um, what strategies are you exploring? This can also relate to your organization needs. So, for example, we need help with our events, and we need to hire a college student to help us with that. Well, the Illinois Arts Commission offers a youth employment grant that you can seek when you apply for general operating support that allows you to hire students up to age 22. So a strategy might arise where I want to remember to apply for the youth employment grant to hire an intern to help me with my events this next year. I'm not forgetting, I will get to the work samples here in a second. Your mission statement. When you're asked for your mission statement, keep it ex precisely to the mission as approved by the board. If you want to explain your mission, that's a good spot for your org narrative or sometimes your program overview. In your organization narrative, that's an overview of your organization and why you exist. I've already covered the program narrative. Budgets. When we talk about budgets, that's have access to a current fiscal year and a previous fiscal year org budget. Your 990 is not what they're asking for. That is separate. So when funders ask for a budget, they're not asking you for your 990. They want to see your budget. What are you planning to do this year? What did you plan to do last year when it comes to money? Have relevant program budgets if you are applying for program grants or project grants. For financial documents, keep links to your most recent 990. I suggest saving it on your website. It's subject to public disclosure requirements. So if it's on your website, it's already handy. A statement of activities that's also a profit and loss statement that shows basically your expenses and your revenue for the year. A balance sheet that shows your accounts that you have, your assets, if you have any liabilities. These are the documents that most funders are asking for. Um, don't forget to keep your Illinois registrations up to date, your Secretary of State registration, your Illinois GATA account if you're seeking state funding. So now I want to talk a little bit, circle back to work samples. Um, this is most often an optional document. Take advantage of it. Use it to tell your story. It's a great way to show pictures. It's a great way to show photographs of your events, the people you serve, your audiences, your exhibits, the performances, the work you do, photographs of panels. Usually it's no more than 5 or 10 pages. Keep it simple. It's something that you will need to update annually. But think about, what are you particularly proud of? What highlights do you want to show that tell your story from the organization over the past year? Uh, One of the things that I like about a work sample is, another way to think of it is a precursor to an annual report. A lot of funders don't want a copy of your annual report. But if you have something simple like this that gives a visual and written snapshot, you can also use it with your donors. You can also use it in seeking sponsorships as part of your sponsorship kit. This work sample document becomes really useful, not just for grant applications. And so if you work on it once a year, keep it simple, you can use it in a lot of different ways that can help you beyond grant writing. With measurements and impacts, one thing I don't want to forget to mention, this goes into process a little bit. We're talking about a common narrative, and so this is a spot to keep any sort of feedback and measurements that you keep. But I do want to say that one of the most impactful forms of surveys that we did when I was an executive director, we had a 1 day family event. It was an art in the park. It was free, open to the public. It was an art fair for kids in a park. And we passed out small pieces of paper with 5 questions. We got back about 100 surveys. And out of that 100 surveys, all the answers were short. So it didn't take a lot of work to go through. But we got about 3 or 4 really stellar quotes to use that became important when we wrote and talked about our impact. So it was a measurement, it was an informal measurement, these off the cuff surveys. And we used that for quite some time. It does take someone to go through them, but the amount of work that we put into it and was worth the investment in the feedback that we got. I want to spend some time. We haven't talked yet about writing. And one of the things that is hard to do in a grant application we is to humanize the story. You don't want to sound too detached from the work. And so if you start writing about statistics and data in the community and numbers, it can place a distance between you and the work you're doing. Funders are already removed from the work. They already have a distance from it. And so what you want to do is bring the funder into the human aspect of the story. This ties into the feedback and the quotes. What personal stories can you use to help describe your programs or your events? Quote specific feedback, don't summarize it. And what I mean by that is, for example, in writing, don't say, a mother told us that her child really loved this program and now wants to take violin lessons. You're summarizing what the parent said, but in the piece of feedback, whether it's an email or an informal survey, uh, quote exactly what the mother said, because it brings the audience and the community closer to not just you, but to the funder. And their words are going to often be more powerful than a summary that you can come up with. Connect your narrative to the audiences behind the work. Just avoid making it sound too much like statistics and numbers. That research is relevant. It's important to know, for example, if you are working in the bilingual Spanish speaking community in Chicago, it's important to know those numbers that more than 600,000 Chicagoans speak Spanish, and more than 50% of Chicago public schools have youth where Spanish is spoken in their homes. Those numbers are important, but you need to go the step further and humanize the work you do. And the best way to do that is to get feedback. And it's okay to call up people you know who attended your events and say, hey, I'd like to get some feedback for a grant application. Would you send me something? There's nothing wrong with that. In humanizing the story, think about the reverse perspective of what you do. What would not happen if your work stopped? A number of you have archives. Some of you have items in your archives that do not exist anywhere else, not just in Chicago or in the US, but nowhere else in the world. They're unique to the experience of your community here and abroad. If your work stopped, where would that go? So think about when writing your impact and talking about the work you do, that if you stopped doing XYZ, then what would we lose? What would Chicago lose? What would Illinois lose? What would the US lose? What would your community lose? Write that based upon the funder and the funder's interest, but identify specifically what will go away if you're not doing the work. I've described this as a work in progress. Um, Update it at least once a year. Add what you need and remove what you don't need. Um, it in practice, I find that this can get cluttered because as a spot to save information through the year, I'll add quotes, I'll add things to it, and it can get cluttered. And so I need to set aside time at least once a year to clean it up and rewrite it. It's always a work in progress. It's never going to be finalized. It's never a copy and paste. But plan on updating at least once a year, and this can be a good time to also start thinking about your grant strategy, which will be a session later this summer. I do want to back up. We're talking about writing the story. Remember that funders can't be everywhere all at once. So you may be writing to funders who have not attended your programs. They may be using panelists that have not attended your programs. Share your common narrative with the board so they understand the story that you are sharing with the community. But also, when you draft an application, task another person in your organization to take a look at it. Does it make sense to somebody who hasn't written the application or drafted the application? Does it make sense to somebody who isn't involved in the day to day? What do they see? What do they learn? What is missing? Um, The goal is to advocate for your work, not just repeat what you do. I like engaging board members and taking a look at it because it's a way to help develop your board. It's a way to manage your board and maintain board engagement in the work. It keeps your board a working board. One of the questions that comes up with the financial documents is the timing of your org budgets, the timing of the tax returns, and the timing of the grant applications. And I have found that if you are, if your tax return, if your fiscal year end is 12/31, your tax return is not ready, but you are applying for a grant in February. You disclose the fact that your tax return is not prepared, and using a draft budget by February, if your fiscal year started in January, funders are expecting to see that you have a budget for the current year. Sometimes the board process may take a couple of months to finalize a board. I'm sorry, excuse me, finalize a budget, approve the budget. And so if the board hasn't officially voted on your budget and it's still in draft, most funders I've seen are comfortable with a disclosure that the org budget is subject to board approval at whatever your upcoming board meeting is. After about 3 or 4 months, though, your budget for the current year, 3 or 4 months into the fiscal year, that should be final. And so there is some room to provide some explanation to your process, but don't take advantage of it. One of the things that I like to do with the common narrative is I keep mine in a database where I can drop links. If you're using something like Google Docs, you can create links to those other documents within the wherever it is in your Google Drive. You can create links to it in your common narrative, or you can create a folder where you save everything for easy reference. There's nothing worse than trying to dig through a bunch of files because I can't remember where I saved something. And so it's easy to have hyperlinks in something like this to the documents that I need the most. I did not talk about research and data um, and secondary narratives. So the research and data is important for understanding your audience and the community. And so you do want to have some of that available. That's not going to drive your narrative, but having it handy, especially if it's census record data. I have some clients that need to report on poverty levels in their community, and so that's a great place to keep some of the data and the reference links. Secondary narratives, in the template, you'll see it's narratives for other disciplines, and I wrote humanities. So this is where I think a lot of smaller organizations miss opportunities for submitting grant applications. An arts organization that has humanities projects qualifies for humanity project grants. And so it's always helpful to have a narrative describing the humanities aspect of your work. For arts organizations, typically what that means is it's panel discussions, it's conversations or artist talks or readings. The sort of the classic definition of humanities is topics that reflect on the human condition. So if you are doing engaging in programs where you're using art to reflect on the human condition, then you probably qualify for humanities grant. And so you want to make sure you have a narrative around humanities to submit to those funders. The reverse is true. If you're predominantly a humanities organization or a museum or an archives, but you have substantial collections of arts, whether it's visual art, textiles, clothing, books, literary arts, those are art disciplines. And so consider how you craft a narrative so that you can apply for art project grants, like with the Illinois Arts Council or the National Endowment for the Arts. This is true with anything else that you do that might not be arts and humanities, is it gives you a spot to draft the language so that when you see a funder that offers an aging in place type of grant opportunity for something that matches what you do, or if it's community development, or if it's translations, or something else, this is a good spot to keep that language as well. And when you're looking at all of your programs together at once, that will help you identify where you might need to write some additional narratives that you can use with funders. Because when you realize, oh, we've got a series of artist talks with and writing workshops. Are we eligible for humanities grants? Let's look at that. Let's write what we're doing and then look at the funding opportunities that are available for that. I have found that no single funder needs everything that is in this particular template. But for every client that I have who are submitting 15 and 20 grant applications a year or more, um, if any funder needs something, it comes in here because I don't know who might need it next. And so, although this template will provide way more information for any one grant application that I need to write, it will contain all the information that is needed for all the funders that we anticipated for that year. I think my voice is about to give out, and I have covered most of the highlights that I intended to cover. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and we'll start taking questions.
Thank you so much, John. If you want to stop sharing, and I will start with my first question that I have. You did say, and let me, now I will share. Yes. So, yes. So before I start with my own question, we will start question, but just as a reminder to everybody on the call, please drop your questions in the Q&A, or if you're interested in coming off of mute, you can hit the raised hand feature and ask your own question. But I will start with my own question. You said to include your board members when you are writing your common narrative. But the question is, how do you align your other departments, or how many people do you invite within your organization to help you collaborate in this endeavor?
That is a great question. Thank you for asking that because there is nothing worse than trying to write by committee. Um, with a common narrative, no more than one or two other folks uh, in writing it. Now, in reviewing it, that's a little different because I do want to get more input on just because if I write it and it makes sense to me, it doesn't mean it makes sense to everybody. But the actual writing of it, I would not involve more than one, maybe two. Writing by committee becomes incredibly challenging. And I have to remember This is a this is a roadmap. This is not a copy and paste. And so the language that gets in the Illinois Arts Council application may be adjusted slightly compared to what gets put into the Illinois humanities application.
Great. Then, and we do have a question from Kieran. And should we include details about where a particular narrative originally comes from? As an example, the NEA grant from 2024, or does that overclutter the common narrative doc?
I would not do that personally. If you've got it in your common narrative, then you've got what you need. If you find that helpful and it would be cluttered for me. But if you find it helpful to have a reference where you wrote it, um, you can include that. But I would not for me, and I would discourage it because once you've got it there, you're not going to use it exactly as you did. You'll adjust it and rewrite it. So at some point, where it came from, will probably become meaningless.
Great. And so as organizations are organizing themselves to start writing this common narrative, what are the two or three documents that you think that they should have at the ready or prepare before they sit down to the common narrative? You had mentioned their taxes. So how do they, get ready and what documentations do they get ready for?
That's a great question. And if you have, I would confirm what your board approved mission statement is. Sometimes in a website, these get modified and adjusted. I would have your board approved a mission. Any recent grant applications that you have that were awarded, I would start with that and see what you included there. Your tax return. So we'll talk about the 990 instead of the 990 postcard. The 990 does have narrative sections on it, but I have often found that accountants, in filling the narrative pieces out in that, are just reusing what was in the previous return, and they need to get the updated narrative from you. So your tax return might help you provide some basic numbers, but I would not use it for more than that. But starting your narrative, I'd start with what do you have currently out there written, whether it's a website or a recent grant application, and your board approved narrative. Excuse me, mission statement.
Right. And we do have a question from Raphael, which actually it's about 990. You mentioned to upload 990 on the website. What if this is not filed because of your income is too small? Would you write in an annual budget instead, or would this be too private?
That's a good question. And the postcard. So if you're filing a 990 postcard, there's not a lot of information on it. And so I don't know how informative that will be for the general public. I do believe it is still subject to the public disclosure requirements. So if someone asks you for it, you have to provide the nine, but it's also available on the IRS website. As far as an organization budget, I always disclosed that when I was executive director because I had donors who wanted to know how we were spending money. I didn't ever disclose a detailed one. I worked with our accountant to um, use a high level public facing org budget. That way, nobody's salary information or compensation information uh, was made public beyond what's required on the 990. But it sounds like you file a 990 postcard. But having the org budget, it's going to be very difficult to get a grant without an org budget. I've seen it happen once or twice, but long term, it won't happen. And so If you keep it on your website at a high level, that may be a good way to manage your donors and manage your partners. Um, but that's really a conversation I would have in your shoes with your whoever is preparing your books and your accountant or your bookkeeper to talk about what that might look like and and what they suggest in terms of your budget. But
Great.
I
We have,
defaulted to transparency. I did disclose. And so the Arts Council that I was the ED for, our org budget ranged from about 135,000 a year to 175,000 a year.
great. We do have another question. Are there any specific modifications to the common narrative template for LLCs? As an example, independent artists or fiscally sponsored entities.
That's a good question. And if you're working with a funder that requires the grant applicant to have a fiscal sponsor, I could create another section on that because you would have to have the fiscal sponsor's tax ID number. Sometimes they ask for the fiscal sponsor's mission, a copy of the fiscal sponsorship agreement between the grant applicant and the acting fiscal sponsor. And so I would use this because your description of your program as the grant applicant is not going to change. You're still going to describe the work that you do, but when you're using a fiscal sponsor, you do need to have that information handy, and this would be a great place to keep that.
Right. So, in your experience, have you seen organizations discover program gaps or opportunities while drafting their narrative? Like any aha moments while they're doing this?
I have, and it tends to be around opportunities where there's a strategy to seek funding. So one example I gave is TechSoup. Being able to identify specifically what you need. I need computers and software. And then in grant research, you realize TechSoup exists and you can get a grant from TechSoup in kind grant. The other spot it comes up is when an organization is predominantly arts or humanities, but then also has the other program. Another one is I've seen arts organizations who also do they do STEAM programs, the science, technology, engineering, math, and mixing in arts. I've seen arts organizations who do community health and wellness. And so those are opportunities where what I usually see is um, a gap in the strategy where identifying all of that up front helps an organization say, oh, I could go find a funder who might cover this.
Great. Now, you also mentioned that they should be checking it at least once a year. What does that look like in order to have it help it evolve alongside, like with their mission or with the community needs? Is that like a meeting that they have to have, or how does it evolve? How do you suggest that they should, put it on the calendar, or is it something that just evolves naturally?
That's a great question, and I like using the fiscal year end because it lines up when you're going to be doing budget work. And so it becomes a great time to look at your grant strategy along with your budget. And so, for example, if your fiscal year end was December 31st, somewhere probably in November through January, you're drafting and you're trying to finalize your budget. Maybe it's earlier, maybe you're a little late, that's okay. But somewhere in that range, you're trying to finalize your budget. That's a great time to then look at because that your estimated budget for the year ahead isn't really going to change from, you may adapt it during the year, but when you estimate that budget, I'm going to estimate $150,000 in expenses for this year. That's what you're going to be disclosing to funders, lets you, gives you an opportunity, an organized opportunity to look at your common narrative, look at what you're doing for the year ahead, and look at whether you plan to request a grant for all of that work. Um, so I typically find tying it with work around the fiscal year end. That's one time. The other time is a summer project. There are moments in the summer where things kind of die down. For some organizations, that's another great time to do it. And in building that routine then helps keep it in place for the next year.
Great. No, well, thank you, Siri, very, very much. I don't know that we have any additional questions. So I'm going to move over and please, if you are on the call, please remain. Thank you so much, John. We're going to go ahead and have Pooja start the survey. This will really does help us to continue to build the series. So Pooja, if you don't mind. Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and read the questions. But the first question is meeting the moment. How relevant was this session to your role or work? And our options are very relevant, somewhat relevant, neutral, slightly relevant, or not relevant. Our second question is overall, how would you rate this session? Excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor? Our third question is what is one idea, tool, or insight from this session that you plan to apply or explore further? Our next question is what would you like to learn more about related to this topic? Would you like a deeper dive into this topic, practical examples or case studies, tools, templates, or resources, opportunities for discussion or peer learning, or a different but related topic? So, after this session, how confident do you feel about applying what you have learned? You feel much more confident, somewhat more confident, no change, or less confident? And our last question is what topics or practices would you be interested in future meeting the moment sessions? And so, once again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I also want to thank John Bateman, who actually is going to be joining us on May 28th. again with Yvonne, affable to talk about budgeting for grants. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a wonderful day.